You're not going to get a job if you keep going, I'll do a little bit of React, I'll do a little bit C#, I'll do a little bit PHP, I'll do a little bit of Ruby, and you just jumping around, you're going to be wasting a lot of time. Hey guys, welcome to Coding After 30. In this video, I want to talk about what I've learned from being a self-taught web developer and what would I do differently, or at least what path I would outline for someone who's just starting out. I've made a lot of mistakes and I don't want you to make these mistakes. So stick around for the video so I could tell you the way or the things you should learn first if you want to become a web developer. Most important thing to remember is that there's many different technologies that you could use. You could use WordPress and PHP, or PHP and Laravel. You could use Ruby, Django, ASP.NET, C#. There's so many different options from what to choose that it could be very daunting to pick. So number one, before you even start, do your market research and find out what is in demand in your area. If it's C# and ASP.NET, at least you know the direction you go. If there's plenty of React and JavaScript jobs, that's what you do. But making sure that you study something that is in demand, that's number one key and most important focus to keep in mind. Because if you study the wrong thing, you might not get the money you want because it's not in demand, or you might not even be able to get hired because there's no jobs available in your area. But with that being said, if you're looking to get into web development, there's certain things you have to know from the start, regardless which stack you pick. So if I were to do it all over again, this is how I would start. Number one, I would start with the basic, learning HTML and CSS. The important part about HTML and CSS, regardless whatever web development stack you pick, you need to know HTML and CSS. So that's where you should start. What should you be able to do to feel like you're ready? Well, you should be able to create a very basic website. The way we're doing it in our community project, I randomly found some theme online that somebody else created just so we could have a design, and I took a bunch of screenshots of it and I shared it with our group and I said, this is what you have to build. You should be able to take a website and be able to translate the image that you see, of the layout of the website, and write it in HTML and CSS. I'm not saying you have to do all of it without looking things up on Google if you forget, but you should be able to make 80% of that website on your own. That's just a must. And for that, you need to understand basic HTML, how to structure the document, which tags to use, when to use them. You need to know basic CSS, all the different selectors on hover, active effect, things that you commonly use. You need to definitely be familiar in 2021 with Flexbox and Grid. Those are super important in order to be able to make anything these days. After you learn HTML and CSS, and you should be able to, at this point, build a simple static website, and you could see a great example here in our community project that we're working on, then you're ready to move on to the next step. The next step is to take the website that you have, and now you're ready to move on to the next step, which is learning JavaScript. Very important to remember here that your goal first is to learn the language. Don't jump and trying to add things to your website because you just want to get into it right away. Learn the basic syntax, get enough practice with all the array methods, working with objects, defining functions, understanding how they work, and just know the basic syntax. Because if you don't know the basic syntax, learning how to manipulate the DOM with JavaScript is going to be very challenging. But once you know the basics, then you start learning about the DOM, learning how to target elements with JavaScript and how to manipulate those elements with JavaScript. And that's what adds functionality to all the websites, like clicking a button, having a modal appear, or having an image slider. This is very important at this point, that you get comfortable with JavaScript and doing basic DOM manipulation. And so if you're thinking in terms of projects, your first project is basic HTML and CSS website. Your second project is that same HTML and CSS project, but with basic JavaScript functionality. Now, when you're ready, you learn enough JavaScript to be dangerous, you're familiar with HTML and CSS. Now the next step is getting your head wrapped around this idea of working with APIs or connecting to into a backend. You don't have to create a backend from scratch at this point. But what you should be able to do, you should understand how to use the fetch API in JavaScript and be able to get data, which comes in the form of JSON, and how to be able to work with that data and how to be able to display that data in your front-end website. And so that would be your third project. Your third project would be making a simple website that you created with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And instead of having the data being hard-coded on it, you find an API, and I love Strapi, which is a great way for you to set up a backend really quickly to which you could make requests and get the data. And at this point, your website becomes dynamic in the sense that that data, instead of being hard-coded, it is saved somewhere in the database, and every time your website loads via JavaScript, you go and you fetch that data and you populate your website. It could be with your images, your blog posts. So that's very important to understand. And I would learn these things in these steps that outline HTML and CSS, basic layout, basic website. Then you learn JavaScript, the basic syntax. Then you learn DOM manipulation, understand how to add, delete elements, how to change classes with JavaScript. Then you learn how to work with APIs via fetch. Some people like to use Axios. And if none of this sounds familiar, makes sense, this is the reason why you have to learn it. At this point, once you get this far, you're ready for the next step, which is learning a JavaScript framework. There's a lot of people that have their opinions and their advice, but what's important to know about this is that it will help you to get a job because React is in demand. Even Angular is in demand. Vue, I don't do Vue, so I can't tell you, but I know there's some people that have gotten Vue jobs. But nowadays, it's impossible to get a job at a company building big applications without using a front-end framework. Not only is it going to make you hireable, but it's also going to make you efficient and effective in being able to build large-scale applications because you won't be able to do them with vanilla JavaScript. Now, once you learn React and you got to this point, you're now a legitimate front-end developer and you can apply to jobs and get jobs, and that's what I did, and that was my path. Now, another path someone could choose is they want to start and let's say learn ASP.NET with C#. Now, the recommendation that I made just now, it's not that much different. The only difference is you would not learn React or Angular or Vue because if you're looking to do ASP.NET with C#, there's so much stuff to learn that trying to learn React with ASP.NET will be so overwhelming. So if you are on that path, I would recommend learn HTML, learn CSS, learn JavaScript like I outlined before. By the way, I forgot to mention as a bonus, when you're learning CSS, you should learn Sass and you should also get comfortable working with something like Bootstrap because it will allow you to mock up sites really quickly. Anyway, but if you're looking to learn C# and ASP.NET, you have to understand that that's one discipline. React and JavaScript, that's another discipline. Laravel with PHP, it's another discipline. You can't master 3 disciplines at the same time. So I gave you my front-end React path. Now, if you start with ASP.NET, you would do the same 3 steps, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but then you would jump into learning the syntax of the C language. You want to make sure that you're able to make console applications with C#. You want to get comfortable working in Visual Studio on Windows computer because part of being a C# developer, also knowing your IDE. Once you learn the basics of your C# language, then you start combining your HTML, CSS, JavaScript with your C# by building your first MVC project, which is a model view controller project. It is the first one you should build because it teaches you the basics. It teaches you how to generate your view with your HTML and CSS. You have your controllers to handle getting data from a database like SQL, which you should also start being familiar. But the thing when you're doing ASP.NET, that's all combined together. So it's kind of impossible to do ASP.NET without doing all those things. And that's why I tell you, don't try to learn React and C# and Ruby or whatever you want because you won't be able to. It'll be very difficult because there's a lot to learn. Now, I am currently learning C# and learning how to create backend web APIs with C# because that's my next natural step. The only reason I could say this is because number one, I enjoy C#, but number two, I've already been working as a front-end developer for 1.5 years with React. And part of my job also requires us to be familiar with our backend, which happens to be in C#. Now, after getting my experience, getting my job as a front-end developer, I started learning C#. It's not overwhelming because I'm not trying to learn React. I already know React. I already know HTML. I already know JavaScript. I already know CSS. I'm learning C# now, and I'm able to give my effort to being able to master it. And it's the same thing I would tell you if you're a C# developer and you're learning all the technologies that are involved in building your skill. Don't try to do React at the same time. If you're going to do ASP.NET, commit to ASP.NET until you get your first job. Once you get your first job, then you could start focusing on, should I learn React? The truth is there's so much to learn with C# that there's so many C# developers that don't do any JavaScript framework. They just work within their environment, creating MVC projects, using Razor Pages projects, and now Blazor coming around, which to me it's like it's like their version of React, except without using JavaScript. They're using C#. And so if you're a C# developer, you have all these awesome technologies that you could do. And the point is, you don't have to jump from one thing to another thing because there's plenty of jobs in the most popular stacks. You're not gonna go wrong. You are gonna get a job, but you're not gonna get a job if you keep going. I'll do a little bit React. I'll do a little bit C#. I'll do a little bit PHP. I'll do a little bit Ruby. And you just jumping around, you're gonna be wasting a lot of time. So even though on this channel, I do talk about React and JavaScript, that's 80% of that developer. But I'm also doing C# now and talk about the C#. And I just don't want you guys to make a misconception about the fact that I'm trying to learn them all at the same time. No, I spent all my dedicated time, 3 years, learning React and JavaScript, HTML and CSS. That's all I did until I got my job. And then afterwards, I started learning C#. Now, I have someone in the community and she did her research and she told me, even like in our community, we do everything React. And she told me, it's like, Paul, we have more jobs in C# and ASP.NET where I live. What do you recommend I do? And I told her, hey, if that's where the demand is, this is what you have to learn. And I told her, do not learn React. Do not try to split your time between the two and just focus on learning ASP.NET. And I told her the path that you should take. Learn HTML, learn CSS, learn the basics of JavaScript, and then start learning C#, the basic language. Once you learn the basic language, start familiarizing yourself with ASP.NET and building their projects in that technology. So the first project you should build is one MVC project. Everybody who does ASP.NET should build an MVC project, regardless how you feel about it. Afterwards, you should build a web API project where basically you don't have the view, it's just an API. And what's cool, later down the road, when you learn React, you could connect to that API with React or any JavaScript app and basically any front-end app that you want. Once you learn and do one project with a web API, do Razor Pages project so you kind of understand what it is, and then finally start working with Blazor. And notice how I did not say learn React. It's only when you build those 4 projects in the C# specific technologies and you got a job because you had those 4 projects in your portfolio, and now you're like, hey, I want to learn front-end framework, let me learn React. Well, now you can, because it's not you're trying to learn 2 big things at once. You got competent in one area and now you're able to start the second area. And I really want to make this video for you guys to really understand. I talk about everything because I love programming. Like, I don't play games, I do different things in coding. But it's not a good way to learn. And the only reason I do it is because I have this YouTube channel and I want to have things that I could talk about. But for my professional job, I niche things down. I work in one area for a long time until I get competent and able to prove myself by getting a job. And then only then I introduce something new to learn. So even though I talk about a lot of things, please note that you have to pick one main area. I always say in my life, I have one major and one minor. That's it. There's no third thing I could add into my life. My major is React and JavaScript, and my minor is web APIs with C#. And that's all I wanted to tell you in this video, and kind of tell you about my thought process, because I don't want you guys to waste your time spinning your wheels. I want you to build your projects. I want you to get your portfolio, start getting ready for your interview and getting those jobs. But if you're spinning your wheels, if you're moving around, if you're jumping from one thing to another, you're not gonna be able to do it. By the way, I just want to say thank you for tuning in and watching this long-winded video. It's always great for me to share the things that I've learned from and made mistakes. And I love to hear from you guys when you tell me, like, Paul, that advice you gave was pretty cool. It really helped me out. And the truth is, without you guys, this channel would not exist. So from the bottom of my heart, I just want to say thank you. And if you're new to this channel and you made it this far, thank you so much. If you like what I do here, consider subscribing. With that being said, I'll see you guys later. And in some of my videos, I like to do the dance. In this video, I'm gonna do it also. Yeah.